Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Hey, greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup, where Dives and Al ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. This is the week of July 24th, and if you're coming from the great and spacious beehive, you know exactly what that means. It is Pioneer Day. And we have a special guest joining us. Scott from rameumptom Ruminations is joining the show. We're going to discuss the leadership of the Strengthening Church Members Committee has finally been revealed. The only authentic Joseph Smith photo has surfaced after 180 years. So then we're also going to talk about the Comefollowme lesson. The church's Sunday school manual is missing a female prophet called Huldah. Then we're going to discuss some more things about the Widow's Mite report that is going to tell us about the LDS Charities. And BYU speech program keeps accreditation, even though they're not willing to help the transitioning people go get their speech therapy. And much, much more this week. Thank you for joining us, Dives and Scott.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. Hey, Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys.
Wonderful. It's great to have you on. You started a podcast. What's the name of it?
I'm the host of the rameumptom Ruminations podcast.
And when did you start that?
I started it just over a year ago, so I've been going for about 13 months.
Oh, that's tremendous. And how has your work with the Mormon Discussions? You're part of the Mormon Discussions, Inc. umbrella. How's that been?
I am. I do podcast under Bill Reel's Mormon Discussions umbrella, and it's been great. It's been a great opportunity to work with him. He's such a nice guy, easy to work with behind the scenes.
So tell me, Scott, I'm curious about the name rameumptom Ruminations. Can you tell us how that came about?
So I love literature and art, and alliteration is always fun. And I like how rameumptom Ruminations sounds together. I ruminate a lot. I like to think and dissect whatever it is that I'm consuming, whether that's religion or media, whatever it is. I overthink just about everything. And so the name with the alliteration and the ruminations just kind of fit me well.
Yeah, okay. So is this, what do people expect when they go to visit your channel, or, what do you hope to accomplish there?
So I typically will present a problem or a question, and I will leave it unanswered, or if I do answer it, I leave it fairly open-ended. I don't like to tell people what to think. I like to just say, hey, here's the problem. Whether you come to the table as a believer or a non-believer, here are some ways that you can think about this issue within the church. And one of the things that I like to say, or that I like to present, is the fact that even a believer could come to the table for some of these problems, and it doesn't have to mean that they'll lose their faith. It just means that they have to look at their faith differently.
That's what has been a response? You've been in this now for a little over a year. What's been the response to rameumptom Ruminations?
I've had fairly good feedback. The majority of my episodes have good comments. They generate good discussions with the listeners. I've honestly been pretty happy with how people have responded to it.
Oh, well, that's great.
Yeah, it sounds like your purpose is very similar to our approach to the news regarding Mormonism, and that we try to provide a place here where people can discuss some of the more difficult or challenging things about Mormonism, and not necessarily lose their faith, but definitely look at the church differently.
Yeah.
Now, we're kind of new to podcasting, Scott. What advice do you have? You've been in this process. You're ahead of us. Any advice for us? We're somewhat new. We've only had 17 episodes.
I just say consistency. One of the things that I have tried to do is make sure to release an episode every week. And that way people are more consistently reminded that you're there, because you'll pop up on their feeds. So just consistency. Keep pumping out quality content. And I think that's the key.
Well, I'm a big fan of your podcast. I remember when I was scrolling through the name rameumptom ruminations. That's a really clever name for a podcast. So that really kind of made me want to look at it a little bit more. And so I've been a big fan of your podcast. I haven't listened to every episode, but I've listened to quite a few of them, and it never fails to disappoint. So I'd like to give you a resounding endorsement for sure.
Well, I appreciate that.
Anything else you want to say? Tell us about your rameumptom ruminations or your personal background or your podcast before we jump into our this podcast.
Yeah, so I was a member of the church for 30 plus years, deconstructed religion. My wife did not join me through the deconstruction process, and so I'm in a mixed faith marriage. We have 3 kids, and we're raising them as best we can in this crazy new phase of life.
Wow, that sounds like a big challenge. And I know you've got an article coming up that you're going to be sharing with us that dropped this week that discusses that too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, tremendous. We're looking forward to it, and thanks so much for being on. So let's hop into it. First of all, we start every podcast here, guys, with the Mormon joke of the week, and I combine news with the Mormon joke of the week. This is advanced stuff here, guys. Do not try this at home. But here we have, the James Webb Space Telescope. Are you guys following that? That's they just shot that up into space, and we're getting back stunning images of the distant universe.
Yeah.
Are you guys following that?
I was waiting for it for months. I was just counting down the days till those images came out.
Wonderful. Well, it's showing us incredible the distant universe, and shows the majesty of God's heavenly creation. I mean, we're literally looking back in time through this telescope, back to the Big Bang. I mean, these mind-blowing images, they make me feel so small when compared to the expansive cosmos. And the most amazing thing for me to think about and to contemplate when I'm looking at these incredible images is that at the same time that the world's finest scientists are bringing us breathtaking images from this amazing telescope, is that God is looking right back at us, making sure that we're not masturbating.
Oh, man.
Well,
I guess we got the courtesy laughter there. That's Scott's saying, "What did I get myself into here?" No,
I was muted, so I didn't catch my laugh.
Okay. All right. Appreciate the courtesy laughter there. I worked hard on that joke there. Okay. Combining news and Mormon jokes, that's a difficult thing to do, but we can do the impossible on this podcast. Now, follow-ups from last week. We only have one follow-up from last week, and we talked a lot about last week, Al, about Zach Wilson, the quarterback for the New York Jets, and how he was embroiled in a couple of sexual scandals, right?
Yeah, the cougar hunter.
Wait a minute. Is that kind of like the ghost hunter?
Something like that. Yeah.
It could be the cougar whisperer. Maybe that's even better.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like the ghost whisperer. So we talked about him quite a bit last week, and we tried to get this hashtag. We said that the reason that he was trending on Twitter, in fact, he cracked the top 10 on Twitter, which is pretty good. And we tried to get, from our episode last week, we tried to get the hashtag Zach Wilson Moroni's Promise to trend. Because we were kind of kidding around that the reason that Zach Wilson was trending is because it's an opportunity for people to learn more about the church, Scott. So we were trying to get Zach Wilson Moroni's Promise to trend.
Interesting.
I went and looked right before the show, guys, and I have to tell you that we a little bit failed on that challenge. We did, unfortunately. Zach Wilson Moroni's Promise is not trending.
Yeah,
I can't imagine why.
It's just not generating enough interest in the church, I guess, as much as we'd hoped. Yeah.
But hey, we are facing a challenge with that. We were trying to get it to trend, and it didn't. So I was a little discouraged. And whenever, guys, I feel discouraged, I always turn to the inspired scriptures. So this week I came across a touching example of Joseph Smith and his capacity to move forward in the midst of adversity. And that's, remember, Doctrine and Covenants 128, which he received on September 6, 1842. And this was literally an answer to my prayers. I mean, Zach Wilson, Moroni, I promise that's not trending. I said that it would. I'm feeling pretty discouraged. So I don't have the exact quote here, but let me read that from memory. DNC 128, 22 to 23. He said, "Brethren, shall we not go on in so great a podcast? Go forward and not backward. Courage, brethren, and on to victory. Let your hearts rejoice and be exceedingly glad when you get to 1,000 subscribers." That was very timely for me to come across that passage of scripture. And also remind, what was that, Al?
Poetry.
That is poet. That is poetry. That is poetry in motion right there.
It really is for our day.
It is. That's right. And also reminds me of that famous Joseph Smith prophecy. Now that I'm just paraphrasing here as well, but I used to repeat this as a missionary. Every single district in zone conference meeting, we used to repeat this, but it's been a while. So I feel like, so feel free to chime in if I don't get this quote quite right, but I remember this back as a missionary. And it said, we used to repeat this in unison. It said, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing. Persecutions may rage, mobs may combine, armies may assemble, calumny may defame, but this podcast will go forth boldly, nobly, and independent till it has penetrated every continent, visited every clime, swept every country, and sounded in every ear till DVs and I'll say the recording is done. I don't know if I got that quite right or not.
Close.
That's close?
It's
been a couple of years.
Yeah, creative license might have been taken, but that's
Now, it said independent, but this podcast, I guess we're not really independent because we have a sponsor, Signature Book. So I guess this podcast is going to go forth boldly, nobly, and semi-independent.
Yeah, that was the only thing that hung me up. But other than that, yeah, it sounded like it was word for word.
Well, that's still a pretty accurate prophecy then, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, that's all the follow-ups I can think of from last week. Do you have anything else that we need to go over from last week, Al?
I don't think so. I think we're ready to jump right into it, and we're going to really jump right into it. This is some of the biggest news and some pretty controversial news that we've got this week. Is a little locket has been found amongst some of the collections of the descendants of Joseph Smith. And we've read about this in the Salt Lake Tribune. Peggy Fletcher Stack reported on it, that one of the descendants of Joseph Smith, and for heaven's sakes, I can never remember this guy's name, but it's not Smith.
Lachlan McKay.
That's the guy, McKay. Yep. He has the same last name as one of our other prophets, so yeah, it's not so bad. Title of the article is, "At Long Last, a Photo of Mormon Founder Joseph Smith Emerges." And seems like people are kind of jumping right on top of this. This is the real deal. This is really authentic. There are a couple of reasons why they're jumping on this one. I mean, there's been other photos of surfaced throughout the years. One was a United States senator that people thought looked a lot like Joseph Smith, and so they thought, oh, maybe that's him. Turned out to be a senator, not Joseph Smith. There was another one about a young man with dark hair and he had some sort of like a talisman or something, some sort of trinket hanging like a watch from his vest. But that one was never verified. This one, well, as far as we know, I mean, they've got theories. Well, maybe this wasn't actually Joseph Smith himself. Maybe this is Hiram Smith or, another one of the Smith boys. They had a whole lot of them, right? There's Don Carlos, there's William, there's Samuel, a whole lot of them. So, they thought maybe this is somebody else, but we start looking at, if you look at this picture, this daguerreotype, next to the different paintings of Joseph Smith, and keeping in mind that the artist renderings are going to be just an artist's interpretation of what they're seeing, and they're going to try to put enough details in there to make him recognizable. Well, if you look at like the lines in his face, like the shape of his brow, and just look at some of the features, you start to see that actually this could really be it. And so I think that's another reason why a lot of people are jumping on top of it. The LDS Church, well, it seems like they learned their lesson from Mark Hoffman and the Salamander letters. So they're holding back, saying, well, we want to make sure that this is really authentic before we make any statement.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty cool as long as Mark Hoffman wasn't involved. That's
yeah, that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Now, I just want to talk about this. I want to get Scott hear your thoughts in a sec. I think the only way to actually confirm this photo is the one that no one's talking about. I think there's a very simple way to confirm the photo, and that's that prophets of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they're always talking about visitations from heavenly messengers, that the veil is thin, but these are too sacred to talk about. We've had many, many past prophets, everyone from Elijah to Elias. Don't ask me who Elias is. I don't want to get into that. To John the Baptist, to Peter, James, and John, to remember the founding fathers of Wilford Woodruff. Joseph F. Smith had the view of the celestial kingdom. We've had so many past prophets come to visit the current leadership of the church. We have Jesus Christ visiting Lorenzo Snow in the temple in 1894, 4.
Mhm.
We've had so many past messages. Shouldn't these general authorities, I just want to say, they should know what Joseph Smith looks like from all of these angelic visitations. They should be able to either confirm or deny it. That's what no one's talking
Mhm.
about. That's what I see, at least.
Yeah. It's got a passing resemblance, this picture, to maybe Warren Jeff, so that's another tick in the right direction.
Uh-oh.
I
Um,
was
I hope not.
com-
Scott, is this an authentic photo? Scott, what are your thoughts about this?
I'm not skilled enough to authenticate photos, but what I would say is the portraits of Joseph Smith from his life. It wasn't like we had Pablo Picasso doing his abstract portraits. I mean, these were
Mhm.
people trying to capture the likeness of Joseph Smith when they were painting. And this photo looks like those portraits that were painted of him from that time. So it very well could be authentic. At the least, it's a photo of somebody related to Joseph Smith.
Mhm.
Now, I think I watched actually 2 full podcasts on this. I watched Lachlan McKay and his interview on this on Mormon Book Reviews, and then I also watched
Mhm.
the Midnight Mormons, and they spent an hour on it. I think what does it for me is if you compare the 1842 oil painting of Joseph Smith by David Rogers with the daguerreotype, you'll
Mhm.
notice a couple of things that are in common. Number one, he has a distinctive frown wrinkle in between his brow that's kind of on his left-hand side by his eye. That's common in both of the painting and the daguerreotype. Also,
True.
his right lip, where his mouth, where his 2 lips combine, the right side,
Mhm.
it tends to bend down a little bit. That's also accurate in the oil and the daguerreotype. And his hair, his left ear is more covered than his right. That's common
Mhm.
in both of them. Now,
Yeah.
what Lachlan McKay in his podcast that I watched, he said that they compared this with the death mask. Because remember, we know that the death mask is of Joseph Smith. We know that one for
Yeah.
sure.
For
So
sure.
they had forensics take the death mask, compare it to the daguerreotype, and they said that according to the people that they hired, that there's an 85% confidence ratio that whoever's death mask that is matched with the daguerreotype. So it seems
Wow.
like there's quite a bit of science behind confirming this. But I do want to say something else. Look, Lachlan McKay, he's an apostle in the community of Christ. He wants this to be authentic. And this is also
Mhm.
something no one else is talking about. I didn't hear this in any other podcast. Why does he really want this to be authentic? It's because it's worth a lot of money. Remember the printer's press that we just, the Book of Mormon printer's manuscript, we just bought
Mhm.
that from the LDS Church about 6 months ago, and we paid a cool $35 million for it. If this turns out to be an accurate portrait, the LDS Church is going to want to buy it and put it into stock, and they're going to be willing to pay big bucks for it. So, of course, the guy who found it, Lachlan McKay, is want to say that it's verified because this is worth big money.
Mhm. Yes, it is. This is. I mean, can you imagine the one and only, or at least the first picture that has been, verified of Joseph Smith? I mean, they were hoping when they opened up the capstone of the Salt Lake Temple that they'd find a photograph of Joseph Smith that was rumored to be around, but it wasn't there. And so, this is a big deal to all of Mormonism.
Yeah, it sure is. I do want to discuss a couple other things, and this is
Yeah.
somebody was talking about whether Joseph Smith was handsome or not, and somebody said, well, he's a 10, but he tips the waiters with Kirtland Safety Society notes.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's that's not too good. But some other people are saying that my jokes, nobody goes for my jokes around here, but that's okay. They're funny.
I chuckled. I chuckled.
Some other people said that he's ugly, and that to me, I don't know, maybe he is because this. But when I got this photo now, this explains to me why the angels with the drawn sword were needed to enforce polygamy is because
Mhm.
he's kind of ugly. If he looked like Brad Pitt. If he looked like Zac Efron or Brad Pitt, you wouldn't need the angel with the drawn sword because the chicks
Mhm.
would dig him. Okay,
That's
I know I'm
true.
making a little bit light of this, but I think this is all lining up. That's all that's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to tell you.
Well, I am of the latter persuasion. I'm thinking that this is not a very attractive man, but then again, I'm heterosexual male. I don't know. I'm not the best person to ask.
It's a different time period.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, and they also notice that people in these older time frames, they look a lot older. 38 years old, which is approximately the time frame of this daguerreotype. He looks older.
Mhm.
The daguerreotype looks older than a modern day 38-year-old because people back
Yeah.
then had frontier living. Joseph Smith,
Mhm.
he drank whiskey, he
Mhm.
chewing tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
He drank coffee and tea, and as we know, the word of wisdom.
Yeah.
So,
Mm-hmm.
so he does look older. And I also want to say that in general, church artwork, official church artwork emphasizes a very young-looking Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
Why does it want to emphasize the young-looking Joseph Smith? Well, it's because a Book of
Mm-hmm.
Abraham translation, a Book of Mormon translation, those are all the more miraculous when it's a
Mm-hmm.
very young-looking person. And also, the church
Yeah.
wants to emphasize a young Joseph Smith because of polygamy. The
Mm-hmm.
older he looks in the artwork, the more creepy it is that he's marrying younger girls.
Yeah, and this has definitely got a creepy vibe to it. This daguerreotype. He looks like a creeper.
I
Well,
mean, if
the
it's
style of photos back then, people didn't generally smile. You just sat
Mm-mm.
there and waited as the photo was taken. And
Yeah, over the
so
course of what, like 3 minutes, I think.
yeah, so it was a different process, and smiling in photos was not common in that time period. So
Yeah.
I mean, the grumpy look is what you would get if you look at other photos from that time.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's hard to hold a smile for 3 minutes in a row, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
But people have run the photo now through filters, so you can see Joseph Smith with a beard, you can see him smiling, you can see all kinds of stuff. It's very amusing what people have done with this.
Yeah.
I can say if it's legitimate, he has the clear and penetrating eyes that I would expect from someone who did more for the salvation of men on earth than anyone save Jesus Christ alone. That much I can say of a certain. Now, the church has responded. The church did 2 days ago. They gave an official response.
Mm-hmm.
Al, what was their response? Their official response?
Their official response is that they've decided to wait and hold off judgment until more authentication comes forward and they can be certain that this is Joseph Smith. You know, so they're waiting for the science to catch up with it and verify it.
Seems logical. Now, I saw online that the church's art department, they have no problem with this image whatsoever because all of the church artwork has Joseph Smith with his face in a hat, so they're not going to need to redo any of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, wait a minute. No, oh, wait a minute. Oh, actually,
they're gonna have to redo all of it.
Oh, wait a minute. Okay, no, the church art department does not have his face in a hat. I guess that. Never mind. I got my wires crossed on that one.
I am curious to see though how the church will adopt this or how they'll treat this daguerreotype going forward. Is this going to, be kind of like a Kinderhook plate situation? They're just going to sweep that one under the rug. Like, oh yeah, there is a picture that exists, but it doesn't really capture the spirit of Joseph Smith the way our paintings do.
Yeah, if you want the full, complete information for this daguerreotype, you really have to go to the John Whitmer Historical Association, their website, and to actually read the article, the official article that goes with this that was published by the John Whitmer Historical Association. You have to pay $15 for that PDF, guys. So
yeah, there is money to be had in finding old daguerreotypes of famous people.
Yeah, there is. There definitely is.
Yeah, the other thing that I found interesting is in this article, and anybody that goes to the show notes can get to the Salt Lake Tribune article. They do have a picture of Joseph Smith III, which is Joseph Smith's son. But if you look at he's got a beard and he's got very dark features. He has much more of Emma Smith's genes coming out in him than his dad's. So it's one of those where you look at the son and you're like, it's really difficult to say whether or not this is a picture of a guy that looks like his dad by comparing the two pictures.
Yeah, that's interesting, Al, that you mentioned the Kinderhook plates because the church ran forensics on the Kinderhook plates when we finally got the Kinderhook plates, and the initial forensics on the Kinderhook plates was that they were legitimate, and that was published in the Ensign. It was only until later when they did the acid test, the more detailed forensics that the Kinderhook plate was proved to be a forgery. So if you look at the Community of Christ, I watched Lachlan McKay's discussion about this for an hour. They hired a firm to do forensics on the death mask and the daguerreotype, and they said that the time frame of the daguerreotype is consistent with 1840 and that all the features are also consistent. So just because we have one set of forensics that says that it's legitimate, that's probably not going to be enough. We need independent forensics people to go in there who are not trying to sell this at a profit. I mean, so there's still a lot of work left to be done here.
When you can see that the church is learning its lessons from mistakes of the past, where they have previously accepted things at face value, the Kinderhook plates and other instances, the salamander letter and all that stuff, where they're taking their time, they're being more cautious with this, and so good on them for trying to be careful.
Yeah, for sure. The church is learning and growing, much the way a toddler does. Yeah.
A toddler who has control of $250 billion. This is
yeah, exactly. I mean, the church has essentially put its hand on the hot stove enough times at this point to understand, maybe we shouldn't touch the hot stove.
Speaking of $250 billion, that takes us to our next article. And this is the Widows Might Report. These guys are always have great content. So we're going to spend a little bit of time here, but they dropped the LDS Charities Summary and Analysis Report of Charitable Giving. So it started that if you go to the this is linked into our show notes. If you look at the full complete report here, it talks about how the church giving historically been members giving extra money. That a $1 donation from a church member, the church consolidates that into $1, and then another dollar is given out that the church has very little overhead, and they call that humanitarian aid. Now, fast offerings and farm output, those are called church welfare. But LDS Charities, that gives to other charity partners, and that's called humanitarian aid. So there's two types of money. When you give money to the church, there's two ways that they output it. One is church welfare, and that's faith dependent. That really only basically goes to members. There's a few non-members, but basically members. Whereas LDS Charities gives to humanitarian in general. So the guiding principles of the LDS Charities, it's a principle guide for their humanitarian donations. They have three principles: care for those in greatest need, promote volunteerism, and inspire self-reliance. That's the guiding principles. Now, LDS Charities has basically 10 initiatives that they focus on: food security, clean water, international community, emergency response, immunization, maternal and newborn care, refugee response, vision care, wheelchairs, and U.S. and Canada community. And they have several partners who they partner with for the LDS Charities. Now, what's interesting is when you think about the key financial disclosures of their partners. The partners is like UNICEF, WaterAid, American Red Cross, Lutheran Services of America, Catholic Charities USA, a bunch of other organizations. All of the organizations that the LDS Charities partners with, all of them have full disclosure of donations, grants, income, service expenses, admin, fundraising costs, capital reserves, total assets, total liabilities. All of them have complete disclosure of all their finances, except for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We're the only ones who don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is very troubling, I would say. The report also talks about how the data is very difficult to understand in these reports that come from the humanitarian reports. But it appears that, according to the 2020 LDS Charities Annual Report, from 1985 until today, LDS Charities has given away about $2.5 billion. Okay, that's in about 30-year time frame. If you divide that up, that's around $80 million per year. That is what the church is averaging. You can compare that with what Elder Oak said in 2016. He said it was around $40 million a year. So the right number is probably somewhere in that ballpark of, say, $50 to $100 million per year. Mm-hmm. If you look at all of the different metrics that the church, this is all from the article in the show notes. If you look at the different metrics disclosed in the annual report, this year's report disclosed metrics that previous years had not disclosed. For instance, this year they talked about the number of church farms and canneries disclosed for the first time, welfare and service reliance missionaries, counseling sessions, perpetual education loans, students receiving textbooks, addiction recovery meetings, units of blood donated. That has not been tracked over time. So if you look at all of the different humanitarian reports that the church has released regarding the charities, sometimes they disclose certain metrics, sometimes they don't. It's just sometimes yes, sometimes no. It's kind of hit and miss. So you can't necessarily compare these against historical averages. The church from 2016 has been involved with charitable projects. Starting in 2016, they had about 2,500 projects. Up until today, they're pushing almost 4,000. And the countries receiving aid back in 2013, it was around 125. Now it's almost up to 200. And the total number of charity partners that the church partners with has gone from 1,500 until 2,000. So all of those metrics are increasing. But it appears that the member giving of money and time has peaked. And this is according to the report. The peak amount of giving for members, non-members, and everything was around 2017, 2018. Since that time, charitable donations to the LDS charities has decreased, and that coincides with the pandemic. So it's not increasing at an exponential or even a linear rate. It is somewhat regressing. Also from this report, I know I'm doing a lot of talking, but I want to get through this report, and then I want to get you guys' reaction. Now, in Australia and in Canada, LDS Charities has to disclose their monies that they pay. So we can get a peek behind the mirror for those for LDS Charities and what they do in Australia and Canada. And this report brings up that there's a number of inconsistencies and questions that can be raised based upon the public information that we have that could possibly be extrapolated to the church in a larger capacity. We also talked about how in previous podcasts, until 2020, LDS Charities published its annual report covering only external humanitarian efforts, meaning that they did not include the fast offerings as part of the donations. But starting in 2021, that's where the fast offering was included, and that's why the numbers went up dramatically in the last years, because they included fast offerings. Now, most of the $906 million that the church raised went to church internal welfare programs. In other words, out of all the money that the church gets every year, about 90% of it goes to internal church welfare. That's bishop storehouses, and when you go to the bishop, if you can't make your rent and the bishop gives you a check, that's internal church welfare that is generally dependent upon you being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Only a small percentage of it, about $80 million, goes to LDS Charities, and that's external humanitarian aid, which is given without regard to religious affiliation. So when you donate to the Red Cross, usually you get an honest and clear impact statement, meaning I donated $10 to the Red Cross. My donation fed one displaced person for 3 days. But of course, with the church's statements, you don't know what your impact was of the dollar donation. You don't know what it went for. You don't know who benefited from it. You don't know anything about it. And that's obviously very troubling. There's also some interesting claims that are made in the humanitarian report. For instance, in the 2020 report, the LDS Charities said that it helped 8 million people get vaccines. But what does that mean? If you help someone get a vaccine, does that mean that you gave them the vaccine? Or does that mean you facilitated or advertised? It's very confusing. Normally, the other charities, when they say that they did 2 million vaccines, that means that they actually injected 2 million people with vaccines. The LDS Charities is saying we're helping 8 million people get vaccines. So the statements are very muddled and somewhat confusing. Also, in 2016, I know I'm talking a lot here, but I'm going to get you guys' feedback here in a second. In 2016, Dallin Oach said that the church volunteered about 25 million hours per year. But in 2021, the annual report says that the church volunteers 7 million hours per year. So did it really drop by a factor of 3? The reports in themselves are somewhat confusing. That's now. I just want to wrap it up here. I'm going to get you guys in on this. If you look at the estimated uses of available cash, and this is on slide number 20. If you only look at this show link, go to slide 20 and 21 because this is the big sum up. Ensign Peak has $180 billion in invested cash. $16 billion. Ensign Peak generates about $16 billion per year. That's about an 8% rate of return. The church brings in $1 billion in surplus tithing every year and about $725 million in fast offerings. If you look at all of those circles and then you compare it to the only 60 to 75 million that the LDS Charities gives and gives to charities, it's very, very small. And the Widow's Mite is saying that the overhead expenses for the church to administer LDS Charities is about $5 to $10 million per year. So your basic sum up here is slide 21. This is the money slide. The charitable expenses for the top American charities. The biggest charity in the United States is Lutheran Services in America. They do about $18 billion per year. Then United Way, about $4 billion, Catholic Charities, $3 billion, and it goes down from there. If you put LDS Charities in there and you don't include the member-to-member pass-throughs, you're talking about around $100 million. It is a fraction. It is 180 times smaller than Lutheran Services in America. But as this particular PowerPoint discusses, the church could do $18 billion worth of charitable giving every year and not touch Ensign Peak whatsoever. It could be right away the number 2 biggest charitable organization in the United States without depleting any resources whatsoever. Okay, that was a big rant. Scott, what were you able to look at this, and did you have any takeaways from this report?
My biggest critique, and as I said at the outset, I tend to try and be a bit softer with my approach when talking about the church. But one of the places where I don't know that there's really any way to redeem their behaviors is how they handle charitable contributions, tithing, etc. This is one of the glaring red flags for the way that the church is run. It's irredeemable, honestly, for a church that professes to be directly managed by Jesus Christ. One would expect it to give more percentage of its total assets annually.
Yeah, $17 billion. If the church is worth, according to the Widow's Mite, $250 billion, they're saying that the church could easily do about $18 billion per year. That's not even 10%. They said that they could do about 8% of their total net worth every year, and that it would not decrease their principal or their nest egg in general. So they're only doing $100 million out of $250 billion. That's not 1%. That's not even a half a percent. That's about a third of a percent of your total net worth. To
But
say that that is disappointing is an understatement.
the hard thing for me to swallow is there are countless scriptures where Jesus is quoted as saying, "Give everything that you own and follow me." And you could pair those with all of the other sayings of him talking about feeding the hungry, clothing the naked. Money didn't seem to matter to Jesus when he was preaching. And so saying, they could give XYZ and not affect their total capital, it's silly. Like, if we look at the teachings of Christ and we look at how he was trying to encourage his people, they should give money irregardless of how it would affect their stock portfolio. He's God. Wouldn't he be able to give them more money if they need it? Like, they should just give it all and make this world a better place.
Now we're starting to sound like we're on the other side of the bishop's tithing settlement table there, because we hear it time and time again. Oh well, you got to give more. If you give more, the Lord will bless you even more. If you want net blessings, you'll then give net tithing. If you want gross blessings, give gross tithing. Okay, LDS Church, look at you this time. It's your turn.
Yeah, if you want to maintain your membership, perhaps consider giving more of your money to make the world a better place.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let
Remember,
people see that.
Jesus said, "Consider the lilies of the field. They toil not, neither do they spin, yet the Father in heaven provides for them." Right? And Jesus himself said, "The Son of Man hath not a place to rest his head." He didn't own a home. He just, he did what he did what he could for the people around him at the time, and he trusted that God would provide for him for the future. So it's just a little disappointing to see these numbers laid out so clearly. And we have an estimate that instantly today the church could be the number one provider of humanitarian efforts in the United States without messing with Ensign Peak whatsoever right now. But they won't do it.
And how much more could they go if they were to extend themselves a little bit further?
Yeah.
To give a little bit more.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean they could cure a lot of problems.
Yeah,
it's within their power.
Yeah, they sure could. And that's what I said. I just wish that they would use the powers that they have, which is just an extraordinary gift. All of the sacrifice of all of these members, all of the tithing, all the people who died for the church and left their estates to the church instead of giving it to their offspring, they left it to the church. All of those donors to BYU who are continue to prop it up and provide scholarships so the church doesn't have to reach into as many resources to pay for BYU. All of the sacrifices of the pioneers. Today is Pioneer Day. Those guys walked across the plains, and those were my ancestors specifically on my father's side. What would they say that they walked across the plains for to see the church sitting on this nest egg? I think that they would be. I think they would be very surprised.
Yeah. How many gave all?
Yeah.
How many did they leave behind, buried in unmarked graves along the wayside, beside the trail? Yeah.
Yeah. And how many people today are also, even in the United States, are dying from hunger, are dying from not having housing, are dying from not having, I don't know, proper access to medical care when the church could be providing much, much more to alleviate the suffering of the humans on this planet and to take care of you're supposed to leave the 99 to visit the one. But if you're only spending 1/3 of 1% of your resources, how many of those lost sheep are going and are never going to be found and are falling away and are just lost?
Exactly. From where I'm sitting here in the Great and Spacious Beehive, it appears that M. Russell Ballard has still not gone into the temple to pray for rain yet.
Yeah.
Been a very dry week.
I don't know. It's a little depressing for me to review this article, but I challenge our listeners. What do you think about the LDS charities? Do you think they should be contributing more? Am I being too hard on the church? What am I missing here? Send us an email to collab@mormonnewsroundup.org or come to our website www.mormonnewsroundup.org. Let us know your thoughts on what the LDS charities should be doing with their incredibly vast resources. Now, our next article here is going to be a lot quicker. And this is a leak from Bill Reel of Mormon Discussions. Someone leaked to him the membership and committee assignments of certain general authorities. And I believe for the first time now, we know who is on the Strengthening Church Members Committee. And the members of the Strengthening Church Members Committee are Kevin W. Pearson, Shane M. Bowen, and Mark A. Bragg. Now, the Strengthening Church Members Committee is a somewhat controversial committee. It was formed by Ezra Taft Benson back in 1985. And basically, according to Dallin H. Oaks, he said that it was a clipping service. I'm trying to find the exact quote here. It was a clipping service. Clipping service that monitors speeches, writings, and activities of those suspected of apostasy and passes on the material to church officials. And this was written in a book by Brinkley and Rogers. So several excommunicated members have said that their bishops had large dossiers on them that they didn't think that the bishops, they themselves compiled, and that most likely those came from the Strengthening Church Members Committee. The idea behind this committee, from my understanding, I know that we don't know all the ins and outs of this committee, but let's say that you're a rural Idaho bishop who just is a farmer and is not very sophisticated, and one of your members has a controversial podcast or printing books or materials that are critical or even totally anti-Mormon or not showing the church in a flattering light. Well, you probably would never come across those materials. And the church set up the Strengthening Church Members Committee. It was originally conceived to stop polygamy, but it evolved from there to basically, I don't know how to say this any better, but basically to be the big brother and make sure that any apostates or dissidents, that information is passed on to their bishop. How do you feel about the Strengthening Church Committee members leak there? Let's start with Scott.
I think more transparency is needed within the church, and that sort of thing won't happen without external pressure.
Yeah, well said. I think that's exactly right. Is that the whole idea of the Strengthening Church Members Committee? It seems a little 1984 or Orson Welles-ish. It's a little creepy. But I mean, they're out there. They're certainly doing their thing. This is a private organization. It's it has the right to police itself however it sees fit, and it doesn't necessarily hold anybody inside the organization against their will. So people, they can come and go as they please. But even so, it's I don't know. It's an organization that I certainly don't. And here's what's real funny is that even though I don't want them, looking over my shoulder and criticizing what I do, they do. I'm sure that the Strengthening Members Committee is very much aware of this podcast and who we are and what we're doing, what we're saying. So,
and that's one reason that I use a pseudonym for this podcast is specifically because I don't want to have interactions with the Strengthening Church Members Committee.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Elder Holland back in 2012 had the interview with the BBC where he admitted that the Strengthening Church Members Committee exists, and that included the official church spokesman at the time who admitted that it exists. There's a Wikipedia article on there that includes quite a few books, articles, and interviews that talks about this committee. I
welcome them to chat with me. Reach out anytime, and I would love to have a conversation. On or off the record.
Fair enough. Well said, Scott.
Yeah, I think that's a good sentiment as well. Let's move along. Unless anybody has anything else, Al, you've got the next article.
This podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Signature Books, www.signaturebooks.com. We invite you to check out their latest book written by Romney Burke, which is entitled Susie Young Gates, Daughter of Mormonism.
Brigham Young had over 50 wives and 56 children, but none has better name recognition than daughter Susie Young Gates. She lived from 1856 and died in 1933. Yet she, like so many women of Mormonism's past, has remained a mystery to most church members. In Susie Young Gates, Romney Burke, the author, paints a portrait of a strong woman who rose to prominence within the church, fought for the rights of women throughout the country, yet dealt with personal trials and her share of heartbreak.
Hey everybody, it's D-Vase here. Thanks so much for listening to the Mormon News Roundup. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Allow me to explain. Anchor has the tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. It's everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. So download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
All right. I got so wrapped up in here, I forgot where we were. Let me find my... There we are. Okay.
It's a Pioneer Day miracle, Al.
It is. The Pioneer Day miracle has come. We've had all of Utah's LDS... there's 4 of them. All 4 of Utah's LDS congressmen have supported same-sex marriage on the floor of Congress. They all voted to protect same-sex marriage and to go away from the Proclamation on the Family, which was the original document that was written up to declare that marriage ought to be only between a man and a woman, to two people of the opposite sexes. But that has been changed, and they have decided to go and Congress overwhelmingly voted to keep it, including the LDS congressmen and representatives. So it's interesting to see them take this stance compared to where the church's current teachings are, because the LDS Church still maintains that it's that marriage ought to be only between a man and a woman. So for them to break lines with the church and go forward with what is, shall we say, more socially popular, this is a pretty significant moment. And how do you think the church is going to feel about these guys that have broken their party lines with the church? Not necessarily party. Well, I guess that they're all Republicans too, so probably breaking party lines with the Republicans. I know that everybody that voted against marriage equality was a Republican. All the Democrats voted for same-sex marriage.
Yeah, I mean, so there's like 440 congressmen, only 47 of them dissented, and it just so happened to be the four Mormons who represented Utah. They all dissented. I mean, the reason that this bill came up was because we had the Roe versus Wade being overthrown, and maybe the Supreme Court will also come after same-sex marriage. So, I mean, that was the idea behind the bill. But I find it to be very remarkable that, that all the LDS people seem to be voting against what the church teaches. Am I getting that right, or am I reading this wrong?
Sure seems to be what the article's saying. And this, once again, sorry, this comes from thehill.com, where these are the 47 House Republicans who voted for a bill protecting marriage equality. So this is basically a piece that was written to say, hey, these are the people who are voting against sexual equality, or marriage equality amongst homosexuals. So they, this piece is basically just an expository piece saying, hey, just so you people know that vote, these are the representatives that voted this certain way. So when election time comes around, you make your choice what you want to do.
Scott, did these guys not read the family proclamation?
I think so. I look at this and I see it as a good thing, and for 2 reasons. I think that on one hand, I think it's great whether or not they hold these values that they voted for or against. I think it's great that they can recognize that maybe their constituents hold a different value than they do, and they're okay representing their constituents even when it disagrees with their beliefs. And I think that's commendable. On the other hand, perhaps they are okay with marriage equality, and perhaps this is a shift in the culture where they feel okay having a different idea about marriage equality than the church presents. And so I guess the way I look at it, it's a good thing.
But don't most Latter-day Saints approve of marriage equality?
And that's just it. I think most of them do, and I think this is a sign
Okay.
that within the culture, more and more people within Mormon communities are okay with marriage equality, and they don't have a problem with it.
Well, it takes me back to the time of the Equal Rights Amendment, which was trying to be pushed through in Utah in 1978, and the church came out and told people how to vote on that. In fact, Utah was instrumental in the defeat of the Equal Rights Amendment. And it seems like we've taken a big step back from when the church used to tell people how to vote. Now they are telling people how to vote, but those people, they don't care. Is the church losing influence? I mean, the church used to be very influential. Think about Proposition 8 in California. They really helped defeat that thing. They helped defeat the ERA. They've done a lot of things. Is their influence waning? They can't even control their own LDS congressmen in their own state to have proper or what the church would consider to be proper voting on same-sex marriage.
I'd be very curious to see if there's some conversations are being had over the phone between congressmen and the church office building, and see if they're getting guidance or if they're getting some sort of instruction to do this. I know that the church is really trying to rebrand itself, appear more mainstream Christianity, trying to soften its hard-nosed image, and maybe this is one of their ways of doing that. I don't know. I mean, these are things that I could posit as a theory, but it really comes kind of kooky conspiracy when I start talking about, this is a phone call that's happening behind closed doors and off the record between the church office building, right?
Well, if you think, Al, that's an interesting point. If you think back to the Mormon leaks, which turned into Truth Transparency, which is now basically defunct, they went out of business about a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
One of those Mormon leaks videos, most of them were real snoozers. I mean,
Yeah.
when people watched the Mormon leak videos, they were like, "This is a leak. This is nothing." But one of the leaks talked about how the general authorities said, "Hey, we need to call Senator so and so, or we need to call former Congressman so and so, so that they can influence this particular bill." So we know that church leaders do call these individuals. Also, on the same vein, when the Washington, D.C. temple was being reopened recently, the church brought out a lot of apostles to walk through the high-profile people. But do you know who else they brought out? They brought out former senators, former congressmen, high-ranking church individuals who had high-ranking government positions, either currently or formerly, to take people through the temple.
True.
So the church has no problem calling in favors and saying, we have it on record of saying, we want you to do certain things and bring forth certain bills. We know that happens.
They have lobbyists pushing their agenda. I mean, that's something that we are aware of. So that's nothing new.
Yeah.
Yeah, the church, especially the lobbyists for the LGBTQ, especially for the Fairness for All legislation, which is what the church really wants on the national stage for LGBTQ. They do have lobbyists in those things. So all I can say is, forget what would Jesus do? What would Dallin Oaks do? How would he vote? Shouldn't we just when a bill comes forward, when it's time to vote, should we just ask ourselves, what would Dallin H. Oaks do, and then vote accordingly? Or is that just too, am I being myopic?
We live in a very different society if that was the case.
Yeah. I think we really would live in a different place. Okay. Now we've got 3 more articles left to go through here. 4 more articles. Scott, one thing that we haven't covered very much in this podcast, we've been around for 17 episodes, is that we really haven't we don't really follow the come follow me lessons because we don't necessarily think that they're necessarily newsworthy. But that is a big deal in the church, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it is a new program, and it came out and kind of transitioned the way that discourse around the Sunday school lessons happened. And honestly, I think it's a good program, a step in a good direction to facilitate better discussions. The old manuals were, when a teacher stuck to the old manuals, it did not promote or facilitate a great discussion in the class. And so I think these new manuals are great. But the article that we're going to talk about today comes from the Exponent, and the title is "Where's Hilda? Missing Female Prophet in Come Follow Me." Now the the section that Come Follow Me covered in this particular portion was 2 Kings 17 through 25. And there is a prominent female prophet in that section named Hilda. And she's actually super fascinating. In the rabbinic literature, specifically in the Nevi'im, which is like the prophets section of scripture, there are only two like principal female prophetesses, and that's Hilda and Deborah. But Hilda is not present in the Come Follow Me manual during this section of scripture. Now, she played an important role in the development of the scripture that we have today, at least according to the stories that are told. King Josiah, he ordered the temple to be renovated. And during the Temple of Solomon, when it's being renovated, they find a new book of scripture buried within the walls of the temple, thought to be the book of Deuteronomy and Kings, and even possibly parts of Jeremiah. There's debate on this. Anyway, so King Josiah, his followers, they find this new book of scripture, and they want to find out if it's legitimate or not. And who do they go to? But Hilda. They go to Hilda and they say, hey, Hilda, you're a prophet. Can you ask God if this new book of scripture is actually scripture? And she verifies it. And she says, yes, this comes from God. And now there are other stories from Hilda. Hilda is awesome. She's a really cool female prophet in the Old Testament. And it's really sad, but there's zero mention of her. Now,
that's sad.
I think that so many churches, regardless of what denomination they are, they're going to pick and choose which stories to focus on because it pushes forward their narrative or their worldview better than a different one. And so in my mind, I look at this and I think, okay, what's the obvious reason why they're not going to talk about a female prophet? Oh, because women don't have the priesthood. And so it's in my head, that's the easiest explanation that I could come to. I'm not saying that's their motive, but that's what the conclusion that I would immediately jump to.
Me too.
Yeah, what's interesting for me in the article is not only is she missing from the Come Follow Me lesson, but there's also official church videos that talk about this particular aspect. She's not in those. Then they talk about conference talks by President Spencer W. Kimball, in which he's talking about the story of King Josiah, and Hilda doesn't make it. Hilda has been, just like Back to the Future, erased from existence.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah.
Poor Hilda.
Al, why would Huldah be erased from existence? She's just an Old Testament prophet. Why is she being conspicuously deleted from Come Follow Me, official church videos, conference talks, all over? Huldah she's on the outs.
If only she'd been born a boy.
Oh no.
That's really the only thing that I can think of, is that the church doesn't want to give any kind of license to the uppity Kate Kellys of the church that are insisting on, hey, equal opportunity, ordain women now and stuff. It's and this kind of thing where you read about prophetesses and female prophets in the scriptures, it makes it difficult for the church to argue against it. So when they take a really good faith promoting story such as Hulda's, it makes sense to me that the church would. I mean, it's kind of a yucky thing to do, but it makes sense to me that the church would start referring to it as the prophet said this, the prophet says that, and just leave Hulda out of it because she's a she and not a he.
So it sounds like you're both are saying that bringing Hulda into this just brings up questions, and the church is not really in the business of trying to bring up questions for members. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. There's a 1984 quote that I love. It's, who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. So what we see here is they are controlling the narrative because they control the present. And to control the future, they have to go and remove these women from power in the past, from the narrative, in order to maintain their control in the future.
Yeah. Makes sense to me.
This does remind me of my favorite apostle, Scott, is Elder David Bednar, and that, believe me, I am one of the few. But I can tell you that he did the National Press Club briefing back in May of this year, just a couple of months ago, and he was asked specifically about whether about women's leadership role in the church, about whether a woman could be a prophet or the head of the church one day. And his response was, "Well, we follow the precedent that Jesus had in the Bible, meaning that Jesus only called male apostles. Therefore, since the only way to become president of the church is to be an apostle, the only people who can be the heads of the church are apostles, are men." But
But that's not even true. There were 4 named female apostles in the New Testament. Yeah.
Yeah.
oh man, I just googled that.
It's
I'm glad we have
this
you on, Scott.
Romans 16:7, if I'm not mistaken, and the only one that I know off the top of my
Yeah.
head, her name was Junia. There were others, but I can't remember their names off the top of my head.
Well,
Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, I googled it, and the 4 names are Mariami, Irene, Nino, and Thelica. Very interesting. I wasn't aware of that, but that just brings in with the whole if we're following the example of what's in the Bible, well, there's lots of examples, just like you brought up, Scott, of women in the Bible holding leadership positions or even being prophets. So if that's your if the answer to why can't a woman be the president of the church, or why can't a woman hold the priesthood, is because we prayed about it and God said that he did not want that to happen, then that's your answer. I get that. But if you say that, well, it's what's in the Bible, that doesn't make any sense, because there's so many opportunities of women in the Bible who hold leadership positions.
Yeah, it's not internally consistent. So it doesn't have univocality. That's what people typically name or call this. But there's not one consistent narrative throughout all of Scripture. Not even within LDS Scripture. There's not one consistent voice, one consistent story, one consistent narrative. And so you have scriptures, typically from Paul in the New Testament, that say things like women can't talk in church, and X, Y, and Z, like women are supposed to be silent. So you have these really unhealthy ideas coming from Scripture as well. But then you also have really healthy ones. You have stories where there are females in power, there are female apostles, and you have both concepts within the same book of Scripture. And
like
so
Abish in the Book of Mormon.
Exactly. And so you have both like positive ideas and negative ideas, and it's just the leaders cherry picking which ones fit their narrative best. It goes to whoever controls the present is going to control the narrative and control the past.
Very interesting. Well, shout out to Hulda. We missed you in this week's Come Follow Me lesson. So maybe she will make an appearance in the future. Now,
I hope so, because she really sounds like a strong, powerful woman.
Yeah, well, we don't want her to be part of the September 6th if she does come. If she, that much.
Well,
that
think about it. You have the king of the Jews going to this woman to say, "Hey, can you verify that this is really Scripture?" I mean, if that doesn't put her in a position of power, I don't know what does.
Well, all I can say is, why didn't he go to Charles Anthon for that Scripture? That would have been. Or better yet, Hulda just could have given him a magic seer stone, and then he would have known. So
yeah, for sure.
Why? There's a lot of ways to suck this out. Or what do they say? Suck the egg, or what is that? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
A lot of ways to suck this egg. Okay, let's move along though. Now we are going from the sublime here, Scott and his excellent research, to what you're getting from me, which is the ridiculous. And this article was posted. The title of the article is "Sex Before Marriage is Banned in the LDS Church, but there's a surprising way around it." Oh my goodness. This is July 20th, 2022, and this is on news.com by Rebecca Borg. Now, what you see, there's a video associated with this, Al. What do you see in the video that goes along? We're going to get a PG-13 rating here for this episode, but what do you see in the video here of the surprising way to get around the prohibition of sex before marriage?
So this video is about soaking. The loophole to get around it, and then to have your jumper humper help you out with that. So
okay, right. So you have this is apparently a BYU dorm room. You have 2 people under the covers, which are they're having a mommy and daddy kiss. Then you have somebody who is on top of the bed jumping up and down next to them. this is finally, I understand what this entire craze is all about this soaking and all this other stuff. We finally have actual proof. Do you guys think that this is a real thing? Does this actually happen, or is this just sensational stuff that is people trying to get views?
I know people that engaged in this activity.
Oh my gosh. Would you please let us know who they are so we can let the Strengthening Church Members Committee...
If the Strengthening Church Members Committee wants to know more, they can give me a call, and I would be happy to have a chat.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad that we never told you our real names then, Scott. Because
Not that I would tell them. I just want them to call me.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't read about this in the BYU honor code. I don't remember the section on soaking and this sex before marriage is banned. It's forbidden in the religion, but it hasn't stopped unwed couples from participating in passionate sensual activity. And apparently this is happening on BYU campus. I don't remember reading about this in the honor code. Maybe I didn't read the whole honor code. I just kind of signed it.
Well, I do know, from my own time at BYU that there was a lot of creativity that was put forward to getting around certain aspects there, and certain justifications that were conjured up in the minds in order to justify this kind of premarital sexual behavior. If that's what it takes people to make themselves feel better about being normal, hormonal, sexually curious young adult, then hey, have at it. But it's there's plenty of weirdness out there, and this is some of it.
Yeah, the article says, while this is not a widespread activity, it is common in Utah of people in Mormon culture to engage in this activity. And this is from the person who posted the video. Quote, I've never heard anyone in Australia doing something like this, but in Utah, it's a thing that really happens. And I know it because I've seen people say, yeah, I've done that. End quote, she said. So, I finally understand what this is all about. And I'm kind of sorry that I actually did find out what this is all about. But this is the news. This is making the rounds, and I guess we need to cover it. I'm glad that we covered it, and I'm hoping that we don't have to come back to it.
Yeah, it's certainly news.
You can cut this if you need to. But what's your guys' rating?
Oh, weird. We've never even had a curse word on this podcast.
Okay, then I will not say what is going on in my head right now.
I appreciate that, Scott.
I just had to double check. I had to double check before I said anything. In my personal life, I can be pretty crass. So,
well, I mean, can you substitute it with a fetch or a hack or anything?
No, perhaps I'll let you know off the air.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Very well. Let's move along. This article. This is all the time that this article deserves for sure.
Yeah, and this next article, it's this one's kind of a sad one in my estimation. We're going back over to the Salt Lake Tribune, where we have an article from July 18th, and this is about the BYU speech program is going to keep its accreditation despite canceling gender-affirming voice services for transgender clients. So BYU's speech therapy program. In other universities, you would find people being able to go to the university and get help, like as they're doing gender transitioning, in order to learn how to speak more authentically like a member of the opposite gender or the gender that they're trying to transition to. BYU won't provide that service, and yet they still maintain their accreditation. And so when it comes to accredited universities, I don't know, maybe we're getting a little bit too crazy in this country, but this is also at the same time, do we always have to have everything exactly the same in order to be accredited? I don't know. There's a lot of questions that this brings up, and so when it comes to maintaining accreditation, maybe so. I mean, when it comes to BYU, the way that they treat members of the LGBTQ community, I think there's a big problem with their accreditation, that they use a lot of openly hateful speech towards members of the LGBTQ community. So with regards to the speech pathology program or speech therapy, it just seems like it's it's not terribly surprising, but it's also kind of leaving me with an icky feeling. Like, okay, you guys really aren't looking to help people.
Yeah, Al, let me ask you real quick.
Yeah.
How is it that they were able to keep their accreditation, even though that they weren't providing what most people consider to be a vital service? How is it that they were able to keep it? Because there was some question. They got a letter in the mail from the accrediting agency saying, "Hey, we're taking a look at this voice affirming therapy, and you could be in the hot seat if you don't do it." Were they able to get around that, or how are they able to keep it?
The best I've got is that they said, well, this is the standards of the church or that the school stands for, and so when it comes to, we're very open about where we stand on this. So and they're very open with regards to where they stand on the LGBTQ issue. So I don't know if they gave more than that, but they so far they're just they're able to hang on to it. I don't know why.
Well, how do you feel about this? Were you able to check out the article there, Scott? What do you think about BYU keeping their accreditation and their behavior, especially towards trans students?
So again, I don't have very many hard criticisms where I will take a stance and say, hey, this is where the church really, really needs to make a change. And all of their attitudes on the LGBTQ plus community really, really need to change. Whether or not they're going to change their theology around it, that's up to them. But the way that they treat these people has to change. And I think it's sad that the accreditation department isn't going to do anything about this. But honestly, they just need to treat other human beings as if they were human beings.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially when it comes to if you're providing a service for people. I mean, it's one, the service is kind of a universal service. It's not just about kids that have a hard time saying their R's or get tongue-tied that need help learning how to speak or get rid of a stutter. But this is a service that is another aspect of speech therapy. And going forward in this world that we live in the 21st century, you're going to have to be able to help people of the LGBTQ community learn to speak in a way that's more affirming of their of the gender that they're being reassigned to.
Yeah, I mean, they managed to get through this one, but this is not going to be the last that we're going to hear about BYU and their accreditation. Some of these accrediting bodies, the BYU is accredited by multiple different organizations, by multiple different levels of everything from regional accreditation to departmental accreditation. Mm-hmm. It's only a matter of time until especially the LGBTQ issues are going to catch up with BYU and individual departments. Even within the next year or two, mm-hmm. you will see. This is, I'm going out on a limb here. You're going to see individual departments lose accreditation based upon LGBTQ issues, and that's going to lead to serious issues for BYU. Because if you're a student who's in one of these, if you're a student in one of these particular colleges or departments, and you lose accreditation, that means that your degree from BYU for your particular what you want to go into your field of study, it's worthless. It is worth nothing. You can't go to graduate school. You can't be certified to do whatever job it is that you wanted to do. It just turns your degree into a laughing stock. So they managed to escape this time on the accreditation issues, but it is going to keep coming. These issues are not going to stop until the church changes their position and starts letting doing these type of things that they really should be doing.
And it really seems that this is the very hill that BYU is insisting on dying on.
Yeah. If you think back to Bob Jones University, Bob Jones University refused to let people have interracial dating. And they eventually lost their tax exempt status. It was eventually restored, but because they had an interracial dating ban, they lost their accreditation. Could that same sort of thing happen to BYU over LGBTQ issues? I would not be surprised at all if something like that did happen, if they lost their accreditation or they lost any of their tax exempt status, because the pressure is going to mount on these issues. They're not going to get away. The voices are going to get louder on this.
I could see things happening specifically in like a sociology department or a psychology department where these sort of issues, the world at large has a dramatically different stance on it than the church does. And so if there's going to be a push anywhere, I think most likely we're going to see it in those two departments.
Yeah. So social sciences in particular.
Exactly.
Yeah. We'll keep our eye on this one. This is not going to go away. Now, BYU just passed through their regional accreditation. You get regionally accredited. I taught at BYU for a number of years. You get regionally accredited at BYU. I want to say it's every 6 or 7 years. BYU just passed through its big regional accreditation, which is the big one that matters. So they're not going to come up for it again for another 6 or 7 years unless something were to significantly happen. But all these departmental accreditations, those are much more frequent than every 7 years. So I guess we'll find out and see what happens. It's gonna come to a tipping point. It's going to come to a head at some point in the future, and the church is going to either need to choose their particular philosophy of LGBTQ, of what they think is. They're going to have to choose between LGBTQ and accreditation. It's just going to come down to that sometime in the near future. That's what I think is going to happen.
I completely agree.
Okay, we got 2 more articles left to go through, and Scott, you got both of them.
Yeah, we can burn through them. So the first one is from Frontier Desk. Frontier, I may be misreading that.
Frontera Desk?
Fronteras.
Yeah,
sorry. It was really small on my monitor. So this one, it was talking about, so the title of the article is Why Netflix and Hulu Are Infatuated with Shows About Mormons. And it's an audio clip, so if you go to the link in the show notes, you'll have to listen to it. But they were discussing a number of different things, but specifically they were talking about the fact that one of the reasons why there are so many new shows and documentaries coming out around the Mormon Church is because there are so many new platforms, and publishing on these platforms is a lot easier. So if one service denies you, you could go to a different service. And so there's the bar for entry into making and publishing a show is a lot easier than it used to be in the past. So that's a contributing factor in this. Another part of it is that there's a general decline in religiosity within America, and the shows that are coming out reflect that. And so there are documentaries, yes, on the LDS Church and the FLDS Church, but you have tons of other documentaries coming out focusing on other different churches and other different cults. You have Netflix put out both Wild Wild Country, and they put out Unorthodox, and a variety of other documentaries about people leaving religions or about different cults and cult leaders and such. And so the infatuation isn't specifically with Mormonism. I think Mormonism or the LDS Church kind of fits into that niche very nicely, but it's the country's kind of infatuated with this idea of religious deconstruction, and you see that with a lot of the shows and the themes in the shows that are coming out.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing a lot of things with regards to like Leah Remini. She's got a whole series about Scientology. And I think her first one was Going Clear, that with her expose. And then, you're right, that Wild Wild Country, that one's an interesting wild ride.
Yeah, that one is right here in my neck of the woods. It's just south of me a little bit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that one's definitely worth a watch. There's, let's see, with regards to Mormonism,
We've had Murder in the Mormons.
Yep.
Mark Hoffman. We've had Under the Banner of Heaven.
Abducted in Plain Sight was another really wild ride, too.
Yeah.
It took place up in Pocatello about a young girl that was kidnapped twice by the same member of their ward. So that one, if you haven't seen it, you need to. I mean, that one was pretty big a little over a year ago. But if you haven't seen, or I guess maybe it's been 2 years now, but it's a wild ride. If you haven't seen Abducted in Plain Sight, you need to see it.
We also had Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
We had Mormon No More.
Yeah. The Under the Banner of Heaven came out.
Yeah.
Let's see.
So basically, what I'm hearing you say, Scott, is so as people, especially throughout the world, but in particular in the United States, as people lose religiosity, and that's been a downward trend for quite some time, watching quote-unquote strange shows about religion becomes more entertaining and a little bit more bizarre. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I think, I mean, I think it's kind of the story of our at least the generation that are living right now in America. It's we are experiencing a disillusionment with so many different systems in our lives, and a lot of the media that we consume, both documentaries and shows, reflect that. I mean, if you stop to think about a lot of the shows that are out today, most of them have to do with a disillusionment of some sort of organization or society or culture. This is what's happening in the milieu of our country right now, and we are fascinated by it.
So it's not just religion; it's systems of government in general.
Yeah, systems of power, and looking at them objectively to see how they're harming people and empowering other people.
So Mormonism could be considered a system of power in that respect.
Sorry, I was muted. Oh, most definitely. It's a system of power that I mean, it does harm men as well, but it does put men typically over women and empowers them over women within the system.
Yeah, the faith in our government really started to decline back in the Watergate timeframe, and trust in government is at an all-time low. Donald Trump did everyone absolutely no favors in when it comes to trusting our government and believing our leaders in about what they say and telling the truth, quite frankly. And so, you know, also Donald Trump made reality TV. He was reality TV. He made that even more popular than ever. Reality TV in general is getting more and more popular. So when you combine all those factors together, along with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it just makes for good TV. And the reason people are the reason that they keep making these shows is because they keep getting ratings. If people didn't watch them,
Yeah.
they wouldn't make them.
Well, it's one of those things where people, even with shows that have nothing to do with religion or with government, you take a show like Star Wars, most people would put themselves in the place of the rebels, fighting the big organization, trying to do good in the world. They don't see themselves as the empire. But when you look at the organizations that we belong to, it quickly becomes apparent that the majority of them are more akin to the empire than to the rebels.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's in every form of literature. It's in every form of. I mean, that's the stories that we're telling right now.
Yeah.
Why does everything in the church come back to Star Wars? It always does. I don't know why it does.
Oh, I could have picked anything. That's just popped into my head.
I'm really curious on that same note, where, and I haven't. I really should have probably looked this up before bringing it up. But like the church produced movies like 17 Miracles, or even Joseph Smith, Prophet of the Restoration. Let's see, there's another one out there with Emma Smith in her own words, or in my own words, or something like that. I wonder how these ones stack up compared to some of these other shows, because those ones are definitely church promotional movies, but with regards to these ones, they're not necessarily church promotional as they are just kind of exposés, or even maybe church critical. So I'm curious if the Mormon moment, is this strictly critical Mormon moment, or is this is there an interest in the church's side of things, and finding out about the church through its own released materials as well?
Well, if we examine shows such as Under the Banner of Heaven, I think they did a great job of presenting multiple facets of practicing the Mormon faith. And they showed the good and the bad, both as a believer and as a non-believer. And so I think that the way it's treated in the mainstream media is a fair representation. It's caricaturized a little bit, and it's not exactly realistic, but it's a fair representation. Where what you have the church producing is not a fair representation, because it is only going to show the good. It is going to ignore the bad. And so just by its nature, it's not going to be a realistic representation of reality.
And I think also it's the fact that because the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and other Mormon-related entities are somewhat more secretive than many other religions. There's not necessarily anything super secret in just a Garden Variety Baptist church. You can generally read exactly what they believe, and there's no second or esoteric level of knowledge that can be unlocked. Some of these, I think that Mormonism in particular is subject to these types of exposés because it is somewhat of a secret religion, and because there are things that are sacred or secret, however we want to frame it. People want to find what those things are, and you're not gonna get those secret answers from members of the church themselves. So people want to find it, and they think that maybe some of these shows can help them find the answers.
Yeah, exactly.
Certainly easier to watch one of these shows than go through all the, missionary discussions, process baptism, pay all the tithing, then get through the temple to find it that way. That's definitely the hard way to do it.
Yeah, but I think we should start with tithing first. Tithing's very important now.
Yeah, it seems like they do want you to start paying tithing before you get baptized.
I think that the first discussion should start off with tithing. Let's just get this ball rolling right off the bat. That's if I were in charge. I guess that's why I'm not in charge, by the way. Okay, so our last article here, Scott, is I thought it would be right up your alley. I hope it was. I found this article, and I thought, based upon what I've listened to your last podcast, that you would find it interesting. I hope that you did. Can you tell us what you found?
Yeah, it was an interesting discussion. So this was from the website Medium, or is this just this guy's blog?
JohnOgden.medium.com.
Okay, so John Ogden has this this post that he put out. Is Mormonism sustainable for today's kids? And he goes through. He talks about a little bit of his religious deconstruction, and he tells a story of relating Joseph Smith translating with the rock and a hat to his child, and his son seemed to be. I'm pretty sure it was his son. Regardless, his son seems to accept it without question, and it made John stop and think. And the word that his son said when related to the story was, "Oh, that's cool, that's interesting." And so John is looking at this and trying to say, how is it possible that this same information rocked my world but didn't rock my son's world?
Pardon the pun.
Yeah. And so he goes through and he's kind of breaking down religious organizations, and the question that he's asking kind of at its center through all of this is there a space for a religious community that would be welcoming for non-religious people? And so he's postulating, like, is there a community or a way that you could practice a faith that you would incorporate non-believers into the practice of the faith, almost more like a cultural phenomena rather than like a religious one? And I think it was a fascinating question. It's a space that I exist in. I don't talk about religion to my family or my kids. I'll talk science and things like that to my children, the things that I find interesting, like the James Webb telescope. That's been something that we've been talking about as a family.
Make sure you tell them my joke, Scott, by the way.
Yeah, I'll tell my 7-year-old and 9-year-old your masturbation joke. Well,
you got to get them prepared for when they're 12. Those questions will come up. So I'm sorry to derail you. I just
no, you're fine.
Keep going though.
It's an interesting dynamic to love and live with someone who believes in the church, albeit in a nuanced way, and then raising children together. It's very tricky, but it's also really healing. When I think, had we both left the church or had we both stayed, our view on raising kids would have been very binary. Like, they have to follow us, they have to grow up and be Mormon, they have to do X, Y, and Z to have a good life. Or had we both left, I think part of the same mentality would have existed. We both have left the church, and we both want our kids to leave the church with us and to, eschew all belief of God and become atheists. Like, I can see that sort of a binary mode of thinking entering our worlds. But since my wife and I hold different worldviews, we've come to this space where we're okay no matter what they choose. If they choose to stay in, if they choose to stay out, the most important thing for us is that they treat other human beings with dignity, especially those who hold different ideas than them. And that is like the core teaching that we're trying to incorporate. That's totally a side note. What John is talking about here is one of the things that is lacking within the non non-believer or atheist community is community. There's not a community for people that don't believe in the way that there is for believers. And I still attend some functions. I don't go to church with my wife, but if there's ever a service opportunity, if there's ever some sort of activity that I feel like it would be valuable to the community, I'll go with her. We went to like a food packing place, and we made these meal kits for people, and it was all members of the church there, and then me, this one apostate, kind of sitting there helping out too. And so I feel like there is potential for that, but I don't know what that looks like. And that's kind of the point that John Ogden seemed to be making as well.
Yeah, there's just not an organization in place to bring non-believers together the way that you'll find within like an organized religion. And
exactly.
I've heard a lot of people that have left different churches and become atheists say, well, that's the big thing that they really miss is that sense of community, the sense, a place where you can get together once a week and just chat with people and hang out with your neighbors and friends and meet people too. I mean, it's a church. There's a lot of different aspects besides what the tenets of the religion are. There's a lot of things that are very beneficial from having a church to go to that you just can't find really any other way.
Well, on the inside, people typically say the church is perfect, but the members need work. But on the outside, I look at it, I'm like, no, the church needs work, but the members are great.
Exactly.
Yeah. So are you saying that the Reddit exmormon subreddit, that's not enough? Is that what you're trying to tell me, Scott?
I struggle with the exmormon Reddit, and maybe this will get me in trouble, but I think there's a lot of vitriol in a lot of the discourse, and I don't know, and that just doesn't mesh with me very well. I like to be kind and allow space for someone to have a different idea than me. And I think there's a space for anger. There's a space for being frustrated. And I went through that as well. But I found myself not moving on and not healing from my trauma from the religion the longer I was angrier. And so I kind of had to put that aside. And as I kept browsing the ex-Mormon Reddit, it just kept bringing out those angry feelings. And I just didn't want those.
Yeah.
Well, just before we wrap it up, you didn't answer the question. The question that was posed in the article is Mormonism sustainable for today's kids? So is it?
As it currently is, I think it still needs work. My wife and I, some of the things that we have discussed is we're going to teach them, our children, some different things on certain subjects. They're not going to be alone with any church leader in any capacity. And there's certain doctrines that we're just not going to focus on. We're just not going to teach them, or my wife is not going to teach them, just because they don't mesh with the way that we look at the world.
Are you talking about polygamy and LGBTQ?
Those are definitely part of what some of the differences that we have.
That might be private too. So
yeah,
well, yeah.
I like your stance, Scott. You've got a very mature way of looking at that, and I think it's very responsible to acknowledge that. Yeah, church leaders are not vetted. There's no background check. You have no idea what these people are like behind closed doors, for sure.
Yeah. Well, part of it is my wife isn't here to say her side of things, and so I wouldn't feel comfortable saying, "Here's what we're going to teach. Here's what we're not going to teach," without her present. So
for sure.
Well, one reason that I pointed you to that article is if you actually go to the base page of John Ogden's blog post, he runs a website that's called upliftkids.org. We're actually going to have him on the podcast in 2 weeks. So if you go to upliftkids.org, the idea behind that website, Scott, I thought you might find that appealing because it has family home evenings for secular family home evenings. It's a flexible approach for kids that basically talks about good morals, how we approach life, and things along those lines. That is exactly like an LDS family home evening, except for that it's secular. That's one reason that I'm trying to meddle in your life as much as I possibly can here, Scott. So
now that seems similar to was it Lighthouse? Is that the other organization that does this sort of thing?
Oh, gee, I don't know.
I'm trying to.
I think that's right. Yeah, it sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
But there are other organizations that do this as well, and they incorporate kind of Buddhist or some of the more secular ideas of other religions, and they kind of they try and teach like a meditative approach to living life.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, we appreciate your mature approach. No one has ever accused me of having a mature approach. See, that's the big difference between the two of us. So
Well, I am definitely not mature in my personal life, but I try my hardest to keep the ideas in my head level.
Very nice, very nice. Okay, so that wraps it up for the articles. Now we do have we're going to close it up with our last segment here, which is the Mormon News Roundup Poll of the Week. Now this is available. Our podcast is we're on YouTube. Come and drop us a like, a subscription on YouTube. We're on Facebook. We're also on Apple Podcasts, but we're on Spotify. We're on Castbox. We're on a lot of different platforms. Twitter. If you find us on Spotify, though, we include this poll that you'll be able to interact with. It's based on today's episode. So, Al, Scott, we're going to have you take this poll based upon today's episode, Scott. So you're going to be our first guinea pig.
All right.
Okay? So, Al, will you read us the question that goes along with today's with the poll that you will find that goes along with this episode?
Yeah, will do. The poll this week is: how do you feel about this week's Strengthening Church Members Committee leak?
Okay, Al, will you read us number one? And Scott, we're going to have you read all the. We're going to give you all the 7 answers, and then we need you to answer it according to your own conscience. Okay.
Okay. Option 1. Yeah. Hey, teacher, leave those kids alone.
What's that from? I've heard that somewhere before. What is that from?
Pink Floyd.
Pink Floyd. That's right. It's from Pink Floyd. Okay.
From the wall.
Or Scott, is it number 2? Go ahead, Al.
Is it inspired with great power comes great tax-deductible general authority compensation packages?
I think that's the saying. I'm not. That saying sounds familiar. As you've noticed on this podcast, I sometimes get my sayings a little bit mixed up.
Well, every multiverse has its own version of that saying.
Oh, right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think I may have the wrong multiverse there. Yeah. With great power comes great tax-deductible general authority compensation packages. Or is it number 3?
Somewhat conflicted, there's a fine line between inspired ministering and deliberate, systemic, covert surveillance.
Yeah, it is a fine line. The bishop has us all minister to one another, but where does it cross over into deliberate, systematic, covert surveillance? It's a fine line, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or is it number 4?
Outraged. Clearly Susan Bednar should have warned us about this years ago.
That's right. I mean, where is Susan Bednar when you need her? Everybody blames the top leadership of the church, but what they don't do is they don't blame the wives. And see, that's what I'm going to change from this podcast. Susan Bednar should have warned us about this long ago. Or is it number 5?
Number 5, no problem. I testify with every fiber of my being how comforting it is to know that Big Brother's always got my back.
That is a nice comfort to know that. When someone's looking out for you and strengthening, it is called the Strengthening Church Members Committee after all. When somebody's watching out for you, has your back, and is strengthening you, that could be a great comfort. I know it can be to some of our listeners. Or is it number 6?
Number 6, not really sure, but this all started when Emma Smith started poking her nose around where it didn't belong.
That there's something to be said for that. I think we would be in a lot different place if Emma Smith had just, done what she was told to do, and not poking her nose around in different places where it didn't belong. I think this church would be a far different place. Or is it number 7, which is perhaps the most controversial? It reminds me of that beloved primary song, "Joining a cult is fun to do, fun to do." I'm just kidding about that, by the way. But still, maybe that's, I have a problem with remembering previous things that I've memorized. You guys might have forgotten that by now. My memory is somewhat scrambled. So if these don't come out exactly right, you just blame my bad memory. So Scott, how do you feel about this week's Strengthening Church Members Committee leak? Which one do you want to select?
I'd probably go with 3, somewhat conflicted. I think that, because you related it to ministering, and I think ministering as a concept is really good, taking care of your neighbors and your society. The problem I have is the motive for it. The motive for the Strengthening Church Members Committee seems to be to protect the institution, but not to protect the people. If it were focused on the people, rather than presenting this information to the stake president and saying, hey, excommunicate this guy, it would say something along the lines of, hey, one of the members of your flock doesn't seem to be a believer anymore. Can we talk to them? Can we find out what's going on? Can we help them? Like, you wouldn't have excommunications if the motive were to take care of the flock. You would have, it would look much different. It would look much different than it actually does.
Yeah.
So since the motive is to protect the church and the church's good name and its narrative, XYZ, insert whatever motive you want to put in there, because we don't really know everything about them. But it seems to be that their motive is to take care of themselves and not the members. And I feel like there wouldn't be a problem with it if the motive were to help people.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just joking around about most of these answers, by the way.
Oh, I know.
I try to make these as most silly and ridiculous as I can. So I hope nobody takes too much offense. I'm just joking around with most of these. We also have on Spotify, there's an open-ended question as well, where you can interact with us, and we have a discussion underneath the podcast. And our question of the week is, how do you feel about the first potentially legitimate photo of Joseph Smith that surfaced this week? So you can get in contact with us there and take our polls, take our questions on Spotify. Also on Anchor, you can send us an actual voicemail. If you go to anchor.com, find the podcast, you can record your voice and send it to us. And hey, as long as it doesn't have too much profanity, we might even be able to play it on air.
Yeah.
Final last notes here. We are on Patreon as well. If you enjoy these episodes, head on over to Patreon. We have a couple of different tier levels. You can unlock some bonus content, some interviews from the hosts, also some behind the scenes content, and some additional articles, and lots of fun stuff. There's a couple of different levels there that you can unlock. Now, for next week, guys, before we let everybody go, next week, this is another exciting episode. We have Devery Anderson on the program next week, and he is the marketing manager over at Signature Books, and he's also a very famous author who's written a number of different books. Perhaps his most famous is on Emmett Till, but he's also written books in Mormonism on various church leaders, and also the definitive work on the LDS Temple Endowment Ceremony, chronicling every change that has ever taken place, all the way back from Washington Anointings in Kirtland to the modern day. So he's going to be a fabulous guest. I just want to remind our listeners of one last thing, and that's that Steve Peineken and I are also launching Mormon movie reviews. We're going to be releasing our first episode maybe later today. It's on YouTube, so just search for Mormon movie reviews on our launch, and we're going to be reviewing some of those old Mormon classics. Is there anything that I've failed to mention, or any last thoughts from anybody, or have we ruminated enough on the Great and Spacious Beehive?
I just want to reach out one last time to Scott and say thank you very much for joining us this week. You've offered an excellent perspective and really given us a lot of good insight as to these articles that we go over. So thank you for joining us.
All right. Hey, thank you for having me. This has been a blast.
All right. And I think we will go ahead and cue up our outro music. We'll have Weird Alma lead us out with his hit from Straight Outta Titles with Straight Outta in the title, Sympathy for Satan. We love that one.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a being with no moral constraints. My number one goal is to hurt the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.